Welcome. My name is Lynn, and I'm presenting this webinar. It's hosted by the American College of Vedic Astrology. This is Saturday, July 11th, 2015. The topic is, when is your Rahu Dasha? And now I'm going to take the screen into slideshow mode so that you can see the slides. And if you are unable to see the screen properly, you should be texting Nishova through the chat line feature on your screen share widget. And this is my business card, and this is how you can contact me, website or email. Email works best. And that, for some reason, the graphic artist put this all in capital letters, but my email is all small letters. For opening, I'm going to chant Om Gam Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Gam Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Gam Ganapatiye Namaha, Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahana Punatu, Sahaviryam Karavavahe, Tejasvinavati Tamastu Ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om. Welcome in honor of Lord Ganesh, the patron of astrologers as well as the remover of obstacles. Okay, so we're going to think of Rahu today. Rahu has a smoke-like blue body. He lives in forests and is horrible. He is windy, vata in temperament, and is intelligent. And this is what we find in the opening chapters of Parashara. Excuse me, I have a little cough. Okay. So why are we looking at Rahu Dasha? A lot of reasons. One, drama. It's one of the most dramatic times in anyone's life. When my teenage son was listening in on the dry run, he came to me afterwards and he asked, is Rahu Dasha puberty? And it's not, but it's like puberty as I begin to think of it, only it could happen at various times for different people. It lasts a long time, 18 years. By studying Rahu Dasha, our beginning Vedic astrology students, I hope there are some of you here who are getting ready for the rigors of study, but it gives you a little glimpse of the riches in store once you get beyond the basics. If you are a person interested in getting a Vedic horoscope interpretation, or you have already, it's likely that the Jyotisha who reads for you is going to mention the Rahu Dasha if it is relevant in your chart, if it's happening during a portion of the lifetime so far or coming up. If you're a Western astrologer or aware of Western astrology, new to Vedic astrology, it is a perfect way to grasp the extra depths and dimensions of Vedic astrology compared with Western. And if you are already a Jyotisha, you're aware of how interpreting Rahu Dasha and preparing people to cope taxes the skills of even the most experienced and the greatest of us. So, Rahu is the ascending node of the moon. In the diagram to the left, you'll notice that from the point of view of the Earth, the sun has an apparent path through the sky. The moon has another path that is offset by about 5 to 6 degrees, where these two hula hoops connect, so to speak, are the nodes. The ascending node in this diagram on the lower side is Rahu, the north node, and Ketu, the partner, the other node, is on the descending side, the southern side. Lunar eclipses can occur when the sun and moon are lined up with Rahu and Ketu at full moon or new moon. The lunar eclipse is a full moon phenomenon. And below we have a little picture of the lunar eclipse. And in Vedic astrology, the ancients considered Rahu to be an actual planet that you just couldn't see, but it was there. It was a shadow planet that appears to consume the moon. A solar eclipse can occur when the sun and moon are conjunct at the nodes and is ruled by Ketu. In this discussion, we'll be focusing on Rahu, the lunar eclipse ruler, basically because it's a big subject, we got to narrow it down. Okay, a little background about the symbology and stories connected with Rahu. In the 9 incarnations of Vishnu, which if you have Parashara, you can find in the 2nd chapter. In a past age, the ocean was covered the entire world. Varaha, the boar, was an incarnation of Vishnu. He dived deep into the ocean and brought up soil to the surface to make the continents. The earth is often personified as Bhudevi, his consort. Notice how Varaha brings things up, makes things happen. He dives down to bring things into reality. The opposite node, Ketu, is the incarnation of Kalki, of letting go, of dissolution. So really keep in mind about how Rahu makes things happen. There's a story found in many different sources of how Rahu and Ketu were created from a snake who was present at a great ceremony in which the sacred nectar soma was consumed. The gods, the devas, intended to exclude the asuras, the demons. The snake snuck in and had some of the sacred beverage. The sun and moon discovered the ruse, alerted Vishnu, who threw his discus and severed the snake's head. But he didn't die because he'd already consumed the nectar of immortality. His head and his tail wandered the sky separate but not aware of each other, but at opposite ends, and perpetually in the enmity of the sun and moon as shadow planets. So among their activities are the creation of eclipses in which they consume the sun and moon. In Parashara, we find several characteristics of Rahu. Rahu is mlecha, outcast. Along with Ketu and Saturn, rules places like anthills, clothing, multicolored metals, lead and blue gems. And O Brahman, Rahu has 8 months, whereas Ketu has 3 months. This is going to be interesting when you start to look at the mathematics of the dashas. And Rahu, along with Mars and Saturn, is a lord of dhatu, inanimate matter, as opposed to animals or plants. Okay. When we interpret Rahu in the chart, according to the later chapters in Parashara, you're going to look at chapter 36. The shadowy planets Rahu and Ketu give predominantly the effects of the lord of the house with whom they are in conjunction, or of the house in which they are situated. They don't actually rule signs or planets, but they affect where the spots on the chart where they are. If the shadowy planets Rahu and Ketu are situated in an angle or a trine, that is 1, 4, 7, or 10 houses, or 5 and 9, are in conjunction with or aspected by the lord of an angle, even then they are yoga karakas, that is, they can be auspicious. These are translations by Sharma, by the way. I'm studying Sanskrit, but I'm not good enough to put my own up yet. Okay, these are the Navagrahas, the 9 planets, the recognized as deities in Hinduism, and this is a little snapshot from my local temple in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And Rahu is there in the front on the left. You see the snake head there. And you notice how they're each decorated and they're wearing their own garbs. And people have been leaving little offerings there to, and this side of the table here has the malefics. We've got Rahu, Ketu, and Saturn, and they seem to have some little offerings. So, as I say, it's an important part of daily ritual life in Hindu temples. The lunar nakshatras, another one of those wonderful things about Vedic astrology, the traditional 27-sign lunar zodiac. It's older than the 12-sign zodiac. Each section is 13 degrees, 20 minutes of longitude, about the length of time, through the sky the moon travels from one night to the next. Hence, it's very easy to observe without special instruments. It is the basis of rituals, personality traits, and also of the dashas. And if you go to a temple, a priest can do a puja for you, but often will want to know your moon nakshatra. And as you study these different dashas, you can understand how it gives you a snapshot of what the challenges are in your life. So, for those of you who already know your nakshatra of your moon, make a note of it for use in the remainder of the lecture. If you don't remember, there will be tables in the next few slides. If you know your Western moon sign and degree, you can obtain your Vedic one by subtracting 24 degrees and referring to the following table. And that's fine unless it's very close between one or the other. If you don't know your nakshatra, go ahead and follow along. We have some celebrity charts that you can see, and I'm available for consultation. You'll see the contact at the end of the lecture. Okay, here are nakshatras 1 through 9. And while you're looking through to see if this applies to you, I will just say that I want you to know, for those of you who are new to this, I want you to notice the planet rulers. Okay, there's 27 nakshatras, 9 rulers. It cycles through 3 times. And we are going to be starting with the nakshatras ruled by Rahu. These are the people that are born into Rahu Dasha. Okay, the second group. Again, if you know your nakshatra, or you can calculate it, you can make a note down. And in this group, Swati is ruled by Rahu, whereas in the previous group, Ardra, the Tyr, ruled by Rudra, related to Lord Shiva. That nakshatra has often a very intense, complaining, suffering, dramatic side. Swati, in this group, ruled by Vayu, related to the winds, Vata. It is in the constellation in Western astrology, Bhutas. It is has the star Arcturus, and it's north of the ecliptic. It's kind of the outlier, the one who marches to the different drummer. And in the third group here, Rahu is the ruler of Shatabishak, the 100 stars, sometimes called the 100 physicians. It is related to Varuna, the god of the ocean, the waters, and this also refers to the ocean of stars, the path of the Milky Way, the galaxy, so to speak. a very deep sign. Often people born in the sign have some of the most challenging problems. Okay, moving on here, we have got the dashas. The dashas are, I call the Vimshottari dashas, which we're going to focus on in this talk, a 120-year carousel of time. I'm thinking of that Joni Mitchell song about how we're circling around through the carousel of time. And imagine that you, at birth, you're getting on this horse, which perhaps it has to do with Ketu Dasha, which is the first one. And then you're going to go through the ups and downs of life, past those panels in the center of the carousel, which on the Dasha carousel, they are not equal in size or length. And they each have their characteristics. We have Ketu 7 years, Venus 20 years, Sun 6 years, Moon 10 years, Mars 7 years, Rahu 18 years, Jupiter 16, Saturn 19, Mercury 17 years. And there are plenty of other kinds of dashas which we won't get into in this talk. Okay, now this table, I've changed the setup a little bit to start with Rahu Dasha, people who are born in Rahu Dasha. As I mentioned, Ardra, Swati, Shatabisha. And people born with this Dasha, with their moon in these nakshatras, experience Rahu Dasha from birth up to somewhere from maybe as long as 18 years. Sometime in there they change to the next one. And I am doing, you might say I'm researching this. This is from personal experience. I could suspect there is some prenatal effect of this Rahu Dasha prior to birth. The next group, Mrigashira, Chitra, Dhanishta, ruled by Mars, experience Rahu Dasha beginning sometime shortly after birth, and experience that through childhood, maybe and into the teen and the young adult years. Rohini, Hasta, Shravana, ruled by the moon, begin the experience sometime in childhood or teen years up through young adulthood. Kritika, Uttara Palguni, Uttara Ashada, ruled by the sun, again in teen years, early adulthood, ending in sometime in the 30s. Bharani, Purva Palguni, Purva Shada, ruled by Venus, begin Rahu Dasha in early adult years, and it ends sometime in the mid-years. Ashwini, Magha, Mula, ruled by Ketu. These people are another whole story. They're kind of unique. They often have a lot of losses early in life, and they reach Rahu Dasha in midlife. Revati, Ashlesha, Jyeshta, ruled by Mercury, begin after age 50 and extends through the late years. That should be age 68 to 75. No, 85, excuse me. Uttara Bhadrapadra, these are Pushya, Anuradha, these people born with Saturn-ruled nakshatras experience it very late in life. And finally, those who may never experience it in life, Purva Bhadrapada, Punarvasu, and Vishaka, ruled by Jupiter. Here's what Parashara has to say about this Rahu Dasha. Rahu and Ketu in the ascendant, the 7th, 8th, or 12th house, are in the 7th house from the Marakesha, the lord of the Maraka, that is the 7th or 2nd houses, or in conjunction with the Marakesha become Marakas in their Dasha or Antardasha period. That means these people are going to have more trouble. Rahu is a Maraka for the natives born in Capricorn and Scorpio ascendants. Rahu gives pain and misery in his Dasha period in the 6th and 12th house, but He does not cause pain or misery if he is in conjunction with or aspected by a benefic planet. And as I went through the research for this presentation, it was amazing how important that is, and you need to look for signs of this. Okay, so now we're getting to where we start to see some charts. And I am going to present the birth data on these, and you're welcome to take a little time to note the birth data down on these. These are A or AA data, most of them, with a couple exceptions where I'll tell you where I did some rectifying. So, if you were born with Rahu Dasha at birth, Ardra Swati Shadabhishak, intense prenatal and early life experiences, often subconscious, high psychic awareness likely. The parents may be alarmed by this intensity. The priority should be to create a sense of protection and safety on all levels. The parents are usually aware of the need for food and shelter and love, and for a good order and discipline. They may not be, all parents may not be aware to the extent that they are also providing a psychic protection and shell and so forth for children. This is where our families that practice, have a spiritual practice, are often helping their children through their prayers or chants and other practices. Okay, here is Elvis Presley, the king. Now, when I attended the ACVA Curriculum 1 and 2 a few years ago, this was one of our teaching charts, and it was in the library. I think it still is. So some of you might know this if you're students. So here he is, born January 28th, 1935, 4:36 a.m., Tupelo, Mississippi. And this is A data. It's based on records of the approximate hour that the physician arrived at this home. There was twin births, so the time is probably pretty accurate. The Shadabhishak moon. Okay, so as we look at this, we notice that his moon, Vilva Shadabhishak, he begins life with Rahu Dasha. He has a Scorpio Lagna. Scorpio traditionally has trouble with the Rahu Dasha. We notice his moon is in Aquarius in the 4th house, a powerful mother. However, Saturn is there, moon and Saturn together. There was his mother had some problems, limitations. There's some depression. He was born in the middle of what we call the Sati Sati, where the moon is near the birth moon, where the Saturn is near the birth moon in those signs, and we'll see this here. I'm going to be noting on the South Indian grid because I've used that, but you can look at the North Indian, which is the same chart on the right. Okay, so where is Rahu? Rahu is in Capricorn in the 3rd house. Okay, now one thing I've noticed over time, I've done charts of some musicians and performers. Often the 3rd house is active when there's because these are people who do things. They're active. They get on stage. But we also notice that Rahu is in Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. And Saturn is pretty powerful in this chart in a lot of ways. We're going to see that over and over and if you look at his life. But there's some pluses here. It is with Venus. Now, Venus rules an angle here, the 7th house. It also rules the 12th house, Libra, which is, after all, the 12th house is not necessarily good, but it does have Jupiter there. One of the things we know about Elvis is that he was a very religious person, that he began his music life in a Pentecostal church. So let's look now at some more things about him. It was a poor family. His twin brother died at birth. His mother was depressed. His dad was abusive or absent. 2 months before the birth, and this is what I mean about the prenatal things with Rahu Dasha, a large tornado had destroyed much of the town, and this was the deep south that wasn't well off anyway. This was a white family who nonetheless lived on the other side of the tracks. He grew up with black neighbors, friends, church members. When he was 14 in 1949, that Rahu Dasha ended, and the family moved to Memphis. They moved into public housing. He actually was able to attend high school and get a job, which sounds pretty mundane from our point of view, but it was a tremendous move up in the world for Elvis. He was the first member of his extended family ever to graduate from high school. A neighbor, a little older, gave him a little bit of training in pop music. He joined a group of 5 of them in a neighborhood band, and eventually, a few years later, it was that neighbor who persuaded him to start making recordings at the local studio for radio. And he, of course, had a fabulous Jupiter Dasha. Okay, so here's a second chart for us. Another Rahu Dasha native, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Born July 8, 1926 at 22:45, that's 10:45 p.m., Zurich, Switzerland. Her moon is Ardra. Okay, so we have the Vimshottari dashas. She was in Rahu Dasha up until age 12. Her lagna is Aquarius, her rising sign. Jupiter is in the lagna, the rising sign there. And when you have Jupiter in the lagna, Parashara says in several places that it overcomes all obstacles. That's a real big positive to have in a chart if you begin life with a Rahu Dasha. And notice also that Jupiter makes a trine aspect, one of its special aspects, to Moon, Sun, and Rahu. So Rahu here is doubly blessed. This is nice because, see, she's born at the new moon near Rahu, and so this is a solar eclipse. This is a pretty intense time to be born, and in fact, she was one of 3 identical triplet girls. She was by far the strongest and most assertive of them. She intensely resented the regimented lifestyle that was necessary to be a triplet. As in her autobiography, she describes the resentment of being made to sit on the potty at the same time as everybody else did and eat, and this was the early 20th century. This was Switzerland, and it was very regimented. She also had a very strict father who was a physician. We see Saturn in the 9th, and much of her Ardra intensity and rebelliousness was expressed against this father who had very traditional ideas of what little girls were supposed to do. Elizabeth began running off at a young age, even as young as 5. She took off from the mountain village and went to the zoo on her own. When she was 12, at the end of this Rahu Dasha, was when she made up her mind she was going to be a doctor, even though her father did not want her to. She poured herself into her studies. She, in her Jupiter Dasha, at the end of World War II, she left college and hopped a train and went to Poland to aid concentration camp survivor victims as well as other victims of the war. She eventually finished medical school in Switzerland, eventually began the hospice movement and wrote about death and dying. She had a long and very interesting life, one worth looking at, but it began with that Rahu Dasha, that fire in the belly. Okay, so I want to tell one or two cases from my own recollections. My sister was younger than me, an Ardra moon, and a rather good family, a child that was expected and wanted, but oh, what a complainer. She was an unhappy baby. She objected to waking up. She objected to going to sleep. She objected to having her diapers changed. She did eventually grow up into a very civilized lady, but she still does tend to crave drama. I'm also thinking of that novel, by Herbert, Dune, written back in the 70s. And there, if you ever read that novel or seen the movie, there was a character whose mother got herself initiated into a tribal witch cult on behalf of her son, and as a part of the initiation took some sort of hallucinogen and had one of these shamanic experiences while pregnant with his little sister, and this little girl child born into the world became was perhaps everything you would imagine in a Rahu Dasha, but of course we don't have a chart for that. Okay, so the next group of charts I have here is Rahu Dasha in childhood, and I've grouped Rohini, Mrigashira, Hasta, Chitra, Shravana, and Dhanishta together. These are the ones ruled by Mars and Moon. And this group is what led me to start work on this talk. After a period of relatively normal early life, suddenly unusual experiences and problems erupt. At best, there's a sudden increase in intellectual and psychic awareness and achievement. At worst, a series of disasters or mysterious problems can interrupt development and leave lasting scars or worse. So, for instance, we have Shirley Temple Black. And this is another chart in the ACVA files. Mrigashira is the moon, born April 23rd, 1928 at 9 p.m., Santa Monica, California. And I did not make an attempt to rectify this or anything. That's something that others can do. But as you'll notice, she is born under Mars Dasha. Now, she has Scorpio. I've got this written down wrong here, then I'm sorry about this. This is Aquarius Lugna with Saturn. You know, there's something wrong on here, and so I'm going to click out of that mode, and I'm going to put up that chart from my file of charts, because I want to make sure that I'm giving you the right chart here. Okay. So here it is, Scorpio rising, and Ketu and Saturn in the Lugna. The moon is in the 8th house, and she has got Venus and Jupiter in Pisces, and Venus is exalted and Jupiter is in its own sign. and they are in the 5th house. Okay, so going back to the slides now. Okay, the thing I wanted you to, this description down here is correct. The moon is Mrigashira, and I think the problem here is that I've got Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's chart up there, and so that's the problem. But she has the Mrigashira moon in Gemini in the 8th house. Rahu is in the 7th house in Taurus, and it's ruled by Venus. Okay, Jupiter in this chart was actually in the 5th house, along with Venus. And one of the results of this, and I'm going to find another little diagram so we can see the chart. Yeah, here's what it should be. Okay, here we go. So this is a person who began life in Mars Dasha, but at age 4 months, she went into Rahu Dasha. So we have to look at Rahu. Rahu is in the 7th house. It's so the focus is on others, what others expect. It's in Taurus, ruled by Venus. Venus is in the 5th house, exalted with Pisces. The 5th house we often see with ability to learn and become educated, but also the arts, performance. Little Shirley helped her family survive the Depression. They lived in near Hollywood. Her mother put her in little lessons as a 2-year-old. She was phenomenal. She had her first movie at age 3. Her career peaked in 1940. So she has got even though Rahu does not have a benefic aspecting it or in its sign, its ruler, Venus, is very well placed and gave her some protection there. So now we'll go back to the screen and look at the slides. Okay, so we notice in 1946 is when she was done with Rahu Dasha. Okay, so there she is, the nectar of immortality, little Rahu. In 1945, about the end of her Rahu Dasha, her career was on the wane. She was encouraged to marry another child star as a teenage marriage. They had a baby. It was a disaster. It did not last very long. But then she went into Jupiter Dasha, and she has a good Jupiter there. And she went on to marry again one of the most wealthy guys in California. They had a few more children, and she had a very enjoyable life as a mother and homemaker. And under Saturn Dasha, she went on to become a diplomat, of all things. Okay, here is another Mrigashira moon, BB Raman, and he went into early Rahu Dasha. His birth data, August 8th, 1912, 7:42 p.m., Bangalore, India. And this birth data is from his autobiography, one of the most detailed ones of an astrologer, complete with charts. And his birth dasha was Mars. Let's look at his lagna. There is Aquarius. His lagna ruler, sign ruler, was Saturn, and here it is again with Moon. Some hardship in the home, some loss. It's a Taurus moon. The Taurus is exalted moon. It's ruled by Venus. Venus is very busy here, 7th house. Venus, Mercury, Mars all together in Leo. Okay, now where's Rahu? There's Rahu in Pisces. Okay, it's in the second house, which has to do with resources, money, dhana. So it is indicative there might be issues there during Rahu Dasha, but remember the things about protection. Here is Jupiter in Scorpio in the 10th house of career. Jupiter also is the father, or in this case the grandfather, and it makes a special aspect, a trine to that Rahu. And we'll see as we go into this. His father, he began his Rahu Dasha at age 7. It went from until age 25, 1937. His father was blind and disabled, but able to marry and father a child, but the family, he was never able to work. He did not have the mental capacity to be an astrologer either. His grandfather was a great astrologer, and from a young age, B.V. Raman was exposed to this, and he began his formal training at about age 12. Economic hardship definitely existed. They were Brahmins. They had therefore followed the caste rules. He had to begin work at a young age to support his father, his mother, and his elderly grandparents. He did this through astrology. He had a good marriage, but once he married, he also had support of a family. And it really wasn't until the end of Rahu Dasha, around 1937, he had begun to publish his magazine, that he began to have some commercial success, and he had a good Jupiter Dasha. And nonetheless, you could say that in his story that it was during those Rahu Dasha years of hardship, of being exposed, being aware at a young age of things much beyond what most little children experience, and this is the genesis of his later success. Okay, and here's another early life Rahu Dasha. Barack Obama, born August 4th, 1961, 7:24 p.m., Honolulu, Hawaii. This is apparently AA data, Rohini moon. And of course, he's currently the President of the United States. He was born under Moon Dasha, then went into Mars and entered Rahu Dasha in 1978 in his teens. His Lagna, his rising sign, Capricorn. Jupiter and Saturn are in the Lagna. His moon is Rohini in Taurus in the 5th, and it is exalted. The moon lord is Venus, and Venus is in the 6th house in Gemini. And so we have also an interesting Rahu. Rahu is in the 8th house, one of the Dusthana houses, the not difficult houses, and it's with Mars, another malefic. And I call this the Abraham Lincoln conjunction, because he also had Rahu Mars conjunct. Sometimes you say that hardship early in life creates a strong person. At any rate, what is happening to this Rahu here? Its Rahu ruler is the Sun in Cancer, which is in fairly good condition. It's angular to the moon. It does not get a benefic aspect from Jupiter or any benefics. So there are some challenges here. And so as we look at this chart, we'll find that he began that Rahu Dasha at age 76, age 17, in 1978 through 1996, excuse me. age 17 through 35. And these are the years when he had a transition from rootless drifter to ambitious student. He, for some reason, was able to make that transition from the pot-smoking high school student, early college, and he became very ambitious and a very bright guy. At the top of his college class, went to Harvard Law School, graduated at the top of his class, in charge of the law review. And during those years, he also met and married Michelle, moved to Chicago, and set up practice, was a community organizer, and was at the beginning of his political career. So this is an example of how that Rahu Dasha, in an otherwise strong chart, because he did have Jupiter in the Lagna, he has a very, very nice moon, sun in a good position. Even though it doesn't get any aspects itself, he's somehow able to turn that that tough experience into ambition as opposed to disillusion. Okay, so I wanted to tell a few cases from my own files. I don't have these charts because it's just too much, but for example, the start of this talk began years ago. I did a chart reading for the mother of a little child. This was a preschool child, and at age about 2 or 3, she had gone into Rahu Dasha. This mother was a well-tattooed member of Generation X, and she attended the Hare Krishna group sometimes. She was a Unity sometimes. She was a Unitarian sometimes. But when she went to the Krishna temple with her daughter, loved to go to that. This little girl would invariably prostrate herself in front of Kali, which mother, who was very much a Krishna follower, found this a little alarming. Now, this little girl had a father who was a tattoo artist. Her mother was questioning her sexuality. They were divorced. It was nasty. The child was on track to apparently have Asperger's syndrome. She was gifted at reading, precocious, able to perform music, but very, very shy. And so it looked as if the advice for this little girl was to emphasize just how much she needed that psychic sheltering. And in fact, her mother decided that homeschooling was going to be the most productive thing to do with her. And at last I was in contact, they were making that work. In my own family, there have been several people with that early Rahu Dasha. I was one of them. I entered Rahu Dasha about the time I entered first grade, and I discovered the cat in the hat came back, that I could actually read things myself, and this sort of became some sort of mission to obtain information. That's how I have Rahu in my first house. And so one thing led to another. I found out about the atomic bomb at age 8 or 9 by reading the telephone book. Nobody had explained about what you were supposed to do in case of nuclear attack, and it was very shocking. Let me tell you. I survived the 1960s, and by the time I entered Jupiter Dasha, I was an astrologer and headed a medical school. So, as I say, that's possibly a good outcome. I have a personal student who's a very gifted astrologer who entered Rahu Dasha as a Rohini moon in late childhood, and for her it was not so great. During that time, all of the relatives except her father passed away, and unfortunately her father is kind of a nasty guy, so it was just a very tough transition for her. It just about destroyed her. My grandmother went through Rahu Dasha in childhood, and again during that time lost most of her relatives. Kind of, made her kind of neurotic the rest of her life. So as I say, it can be a make or break thing. It's right now we're working with a little boy who's got Rahu and Mars in his third house, and he's precocious, he's utterly competitive, and he is unable to leave go of that video game without melting down. He goes to school in Silicon Valley and is surrounded by children of tiger mothers, and he attacks all of these issues as if his life depended on it. We're hoping that his remedy, Jupiter, to try to get to spend a little bit of time with Grandpa, who's more relaxed, to understand that you do have to have that balance in life. So it remains to be seen how he will survive his Rahu Dasha. So now we're moving on to the next group. I'm going to take a little pause to drink some water here. We're at about 53 minutes. We'll probably be done in about another 20 minutes. Okay, early adulthood, ambition or disaster. Bharani, Kritika, Purva Palguni, Uttara Palguni, Purva Bhadrapada, Uttara Bhadrapada. These Sun and Venus ruled nakshatras begin Rahu Dasha when hormones and ambitions are at their peak. At best, these are the late bloomers who find the career which works for them or make midlife corrections. At worst, a series of disasters. And it's very easy to find examples of Rahu Dasha for these people among celebrities. So we have several. The Dalai Lama, born July 6, 1935, 4:38 a.m., Tangster, Qinghai, Tibet. That's actually now China, so if you want to look it up on your program, it's going to be China. Purva Palguni moon. Okay, so looking at his chart here, we see the Lagna, the rising sign Gemini. It's packed here. We have got Mercury almost exactly on the Lagna, just barely rising. At 2 degrees, we got the Sun at 19, and we got Ketu at 29 degrees. A very powerful Mercury. And Mercury is in the sign ruler is Mercury, which is actually in the Lagna. So even though we've got Sun and Ketu here, I count this as a benefic Mercury. And we've got the Moon. The Moon is in the third house in Leo with Venus. So even though they're not necessarily the most compatible planets, the Moon gets along with everybody. Moon and Venus here. This in Leo, this is a sunny disposition, somebody who can get, who can speak, who can move. Okay. We have got Jupiter making an aspect to the ascendant, again, giving that additional protection. Okay. We've got Rahu over here in the 7th house. And so when Rahu Dasha comes along, he's having to let go of his own ego and serve others. Okay? If he were a person who was planning to become married and take up household life, I could see this being a problem. But as he was selected at birth to be a leader, it may be less so. Okay, so we've also got Saturn opposite the Venus and Moon. Now, he began life in Venus Dasha. Okay, the first few years, 1935, 1951, this was before the takeover by China. were rather benign. Third house, it's with Venus and the Moon. Okay, Venus and Moon together in Leo. It's pretty good. Okay, then it gets to Sun Dasha, and that was from 51 to 57. Here he is with his, this is where he really has to start to be a leader. He was basically given the elevated from trainee status to being the actual Dalai Lama. The Chinese took over. It was tough. Then we've got Moon Dasha, and it was 57 to 67. It was during this time that they escaped over the Himalayas and were in Tibet. From 67 to 74, he was busy setting up Tibetan exile in Dharamsala. Now we get to Rahu Dasha, and I didn't put all of his dashas. He had others after this, from 74 to 92. Okay, this is when he began his speaking tours, where he went around the world speaking on behalf of the Tibet in exile, of Buddhism, and making connections and promoting peaceful dialogue with all sorts of people. In 1989, during the Rahu Dasha is when he got the Nobel Peace Prize. And after that, of course, he went into Mercury Dasha, and as we go back to look, his Mercury is in the Lagna, so that has been a powerful period too. And then he was into Ketu Dasha again here, and I believe that during the Ketu Dasha is when he began to relinquish the day-to-day duties. He's now 80 years old. So it's a very unusual, interesting chart. Okay, here's a little bit more mundane example. We've got Ronald Reagan. Okay, born February 6, 1911, 4:16 a.m., and this is a rectified time, and it's been rectified by both a Western astrologer, and I've rectified it, and it's exact. It's Tampico, Illinois, Bharani moon. Now, looking at this chart, the Lagna, rising sign Sagittarius, the cowboy guy. He was first he was an actor, and then in B movies. Then he eventually became a politician and president. He has Mars and Mercury there. He was a quick study, able to learn lines, remember things, walk the talk, so to speak. His Lagnesha, the ruler of his Lagna, of Sagittarius, is Jupiter, and Jupiter is interesting. It's in the 11th house of gains, and it is in a very close conjunction with Ketu, only 30 degrees apart, and notice that means it's opposite Rahu. So Jupiter gives Rahu a little bit of protection there. This is a good thing because he has a really horrible 5th house. He's got the moon in Bharani, which is fairly intense to begin with. He has Saturn and Rahu together there in Aries, and this is tough. Okay, he had a very difficult early life, and one plus of this is the ruler of that sign is Mars, which is in the Lagna with Mercury. So he was able to transform a lot of that awful stuff into being an actor and public person. Okay, so we see here how we get a bit of benefit for Rahu there. So the really yucky years of his life, child of an alcoholic, the depression, all of these things occurred during some of these early years. We'll focus on Mars. 1935, he got his first job as a radio announcer in Davenport, Iowa. A few years after, a little bit after that, a couple years later, he managed to get himself to Hollywood, starting at the bottom of the rung, working his way up. And he was married to Jane Wyman, whose career was kind of outpacing his. At age 31, he entered Rahu Dasha just as World War II started, and it was a disaster for his movie career because he was kind of already getting to be a has-been, but he wasn't even allowed to be on film. They wanted him in the film production and direction end. He narrated. He was involved in hundreds of these films by the Army, but they didn't want him on the camera because it would distract from the message of how to deploy a parachute or whatever it was. By the end of the war, his marriage was gone south. His second child died as an infant. And he was in the hospital with pneumonia when Jane Wyman decided to walk out on him. He left the hospital, had to move in with his mother. It was during this post-war period in Rahu that he reinvented himself, found this other career as a spokesperson. He became a Republican and was kind of recruited to be a spokesperson for the wealthy Republicans of Hollywood. He got a job touring the country for General Electric, hosting a weekly show on television. He had his face in front of that entire generation of people his age who were salarymen and watched television at night. And this is when he kind of put together his platform, and he sort of launched himself in 1960 by nominating, I believe it was, I forget if it was, I think he did a nominating speech for Richard Nixon, or maybe in '64 for Goldwater, but it was at this point that he kind of got into Jupiter Dasha and was on the political scene and began a rise during Jupiter Dasha. Okay, so some other examples that I don't have up on slides. We have Madonna, another chart of somebody who was in the ACFA library files. Personality known to a lot of us. She's a Purva Palguni. When she got to Rahu Dasha in her 30s, of course, that's a tough age if you're a female pop star, because of course, you know, it's harder to have the looks and the sex appeal. She was making a movie about Evita, had some sort of spiritual experience, and she ended up joining a kind of New Agey Kabbalah group. But that's also when she had her second and third marriages and had her children and adopted children from African orphanages and had her third marriage break up, and yet somehow she survived that and she's on the scene. So you could see, however, that in certain charts that could be a potential problem age. The person who has maybe not got a good foundation and follows Rahu around, and Rahu has endless appetite. I kind of call Rahu the Pac-Man of the skies, and so sometimes it can lead to some of these disasters we hear about: midlife crisis, families breaking up, all of that. Okay, now we're getting to Rahu and midlife crisis. Ashwini, Magha, Mula, these signs are born under Ketu. And they often have a very intense early life, sex, drugs, rock and roll, I call it. And they get to Rahu Dasha at sometime in their 40s, and they are not done until age 61 to 70. There could be a lot of insights and accomplishments during this time. I have a client right now who I've worked with the coaching module, and we continue this relationship. This lady is an Ashwini. She was born under Ketu Dasha. She had her Rahu is in her 4th house. She had an awful mom, kind of crazy family. Her mom decided that she ought to go out on her own when she was 14. Had a baby at 15 who was handicapped, and yet she managed to rise from the ashes, get work at the grocery, get an associate degree, become an executive secretary, support her son, half the time supporting the relatives. She gets to Rahu Dasha, and the family turns on her. And her family took everything, basically, and she was starting over. She had a great deal of strength. She's only partway through this dasha, though. It's very, very challenging. I have another client, a woman who moved from Russia and married an American doctor, and now in her Rahu Dasha at the same time as menopause. Not easy. People like this find you if you're an astrologer. Well, now let's look at a chart. Mary Shelley, August 30th, 1797, 11:20 p.m., London, England. This is AA data from her father's diary. Her father and mother were part of the circle of romantics, and there actually were people at that time interested in astrology, a few of them. Mula Moon. Okay. This is the gal who wrote Frankenstein. Now, she began under Ketu Dasha, and 10 days later, her mother died, a noted feminist author. She grew up visiting her mother's gravestone, reading her mother's writings. In 1801, she entered Venus Dasha. Venus Dasha was not good for her. Her stepmother was kind of awful to her. She rebelled. She ran off ran off with Percy Shelley and started writing. Anyway, her Rahu Dasha was at the end of her life. Now, this is a very interesting chart because she's got Gemini, Lugna. Here we go. And Saturn is there. So far, so good. She was actually in person a fairly modest person. She liked to write. She wasn't, a public person. Okay, the ruler of the Lugna is Mercury. Mercury is in its own sign, exalted in the 4th house of Virgo with Venus. And it's opposite Jupiter in its own sign in Pisces in the 10th. And this is a Saraswati yoga, a very talented person. With artistic or literary skills. And we also have a moon in the 7th house in Sagittarius, and it is forming a Gajacashari yoga with Jupiter in the 10th. Overall, we've got all the benefics in the angles. There are all sorts of yogas you can look up on this one if you want to take the time. It's amazing. But now we get to her moon, Mula, okay? Rahu is in Taurus in the 12th house, and Rahu is not so good. Rahu is ruled by Venus, which is in the 4th here, and the good news is that even though it's in a house of loss and it's not receiving any aspects or connections with benefics, is that when she was under stress, she would write. If things were really bad, what did Mary Shelley do? Translate Greek, study a new language, write in her diary, write another novel. You get the picture. Okay, here's a little picture of her. She wrote Frankenstein at age 19. She ran away with Percy Shelley at age 16 and lived with him until his death, and she was 25 when he died. It was really stupid. He had an unsafe ocean-going yacht and had a sailing accident. She only had one child that survived, even though she had seven pregnancies and births. And she went back to England after she lost Percy with one child and with all of the sorts of difficulties facing women in those days, and somehow made a go of it writing. When she got to Rahu Dasha, age 47, of course, this is the 12th house. One good thing was her son's grandfather, Percy Shelley's dad, finally died, and he got an estate. Bad news, his grandmother stripped out all the movables, and there was a crop failure. The good news was Mary with all her experience of scripting and saving, knew just what to do. She got her son and his young wife through that to the point where they were able to have a decent life, but she had a brain tumor, and she did not survive that. Died under Rahu Dasha. Jackie Onassis is another example of somebody who began in Ketu Dasha, and when she had a very interesting life. When she got to Rahu Dasha, she died of ovarian cancer. So I would say the take-home message with those folks is have them look at their health screening and health care and their health practices to get through that midlife. Late life, we've got Rahu Dasha for Pushya, Alesha, Anuradha, Jesta, Uttara, Bhadrapada, and Revati, ruled by Mercury and Saturn. This comes up very late in life and often as health problems, but there are exceptions. So here are a couple exceptions. Okay, Mohandas Gandhi, Mahadevi, born October 2nd, 1869, 7:11 a.m., Porbandar, India. This is Ashlesha moon. He was born in a Mercury Dasha. You can read the little list of dashas there. I'm not going to repeat them, but we'll start with Rahu Dasha there, 1922 to 1940. Now, looking at his birth chart, we notice he's a Virgo rising. You might expect with somebody who was so fastidious, so perfectionistic, apparently difficult to live with, according to his family. And the sun in the Lagna, he had a tendency to express himself. The ruler is Mercury in the second house with Venus and Mars, and he was the Venus and Mars there. He's able to express himself well as a Libra. He had no problem earning money as an attorney. That wasn't the issue. He voluntarily led that lifestyle. The moon in the 11th, and this is where it gets interesting, and this is where we're not seeing quite the nice little professional life. Okay, moon together with Rahu in the 11th, Cancer, Ashlesha. Okay, Ashlesha is the snake. It's a very intense, deep, dedicated thing with Rahu. There's a person who can't let go of something once they start it. The moon is in its own sign, and Rahu benefits from the fact that that's a pretty benign moon there. We've also got Jupiter opposite Venus, Mercury, Mars here. So what happens? Okay, it's a long story. In short, around 1922 was when he was elected to lead the Indian National Congress. And by the end of Rahu in 1940, World War II had started. The British Raj announced that India would also declare war. Gandhi was outraged that the Indians were expected to do this with no say in the matter themselves. He withdrew from Congress based on his pacifist principles. He continued to be a public figure, and after the war, of course, with the partition of India and Pakistan, was during his Jupiter dashas when that all took place and when he was assassinated. But a lot of things happened during that 1922 to 1940 era. That was 11th house, the house of gains. He was, of course, you might say the combination of the spiritual warrior, the politician, the lawyer, the public speaker, controversial, not necessarily always following the precepts of tradition, either east or west. Okay, Jane Goodall, April 3rd, 1934, 11:30 p.m., Hempstead, England, Anuradha moon. Okay, now again, a lot of dashas have been through, and she did, this is the gal who went to Africa as a young adult, who met and followed Louis Leakey. He had her go in the jungle and observe chimps. She came up with all sorts of stuff. She became famous in her own right. In later life, she's been an advocate for the rights of animals. And in her chart, we have got the moon in the Lagna in Scorpio. And remember, Scorpio, that Rahu Dasha may be difficult. She's got a good chart, though, as you might think that someone is famous. Her Lagna Lord Venus is in Aquarius with its planetary friends Mercury and Saturn. Saturn is in its own sign. She had a fabulous mother. Her mother actually went with her to live in the jungle to help her when she started. She had a strong Mars, Sun, and Pisces in the 5th house, really good constitution, or she couldn't have survived all this, opposite Jupiter in the 11th. And notice that Jupiter makes a favorable aspect to Rahu. So here she is in 2010, in her 80s, she goes into Rahu Dasha. Okay, so some is saying, okay, well, health is an issue, you know. Well, yeah, but what does she do? She continues to go on world speaking tours on behalf of animal rights causes. The difference is that under Rahu Dasha, she's really addressing global warming, extinction, habitat loss. She's also attempting to appeal to children to get some useful forever messages into those children's movies about animals. The latest, I think, was Monkey Island. There's been 2 of them. She's kind of going back to her roots because that there is her favorite stuffed animal that she got when she was a toddler, a little chimp toy. And I think she's hoping to reach further generations with this. So that is to say some examples of Rahu Dasha, late in life where something happened. Now we get to those who may never know Rahu Dasha, those born under Jupiter-ruled nakshatras, Punarvasu, Vishaka, Purva Bhadrapada, and I didn't find anybody I really wanted to do their chart. I think it was like, out of some celebrities on one list I had, it was like Bob Hope and Hugh Hefner, so I spared you the agony of those guys. But it's continued research because there are more people living into these late decades of life, and it was so we may see more examples of some of them who may have something productive to do at that time, reflecting legacy. Another topic of research I have is these people never know Rahu Dasha. They were born in Jupiter Dasha. For them, Rahu Dasha would have been some years before birth almost. In looking at charts in my family, I noticed that if you were to work backward in those years of Rahu Dasha for these Jupiter people, were years in which some pretty awful, powerful things happened in the parents' generation that affected their entire lives. So, for instance, my dad, born as a Punarvasu, never experienced Rahu Dasha, but in the years when it would have been prenatally, his grandfather was a spiritualist medium. His mother grew up in that environment, but witnessed her father commit suicide at age 9, and all the other relatives except one died, and therefore it affected how his mother was and affected his life. So that's as I say, I'm opening that up. That is not in the classics, an opportunity for research. And now we're at 1:20, and that's the end of the slides. And do we have time for questions, Shobha?
Maybe not, I think, because it has gone on to 1:20. If that's okay by you.